My sister always bragged about her parenting while mocking me for being childfree. At our family barbecue, she snapped, "You'd never understand what real love feels like." I looked at her and said, "Funny you say that, because I just finalized my adoption." Everyone went quiet. I never thought a family barbecue could become the setting for the single most defining moment between me and my sister, but that's exactly what happened. To back up a bit, I'm Deirdre, 42, single, child-free by choice, or at least I was. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, where I work in nonprofit housing for displaced women and children. For most of my adult life, I've had to navigate awkward conversations at family events about when I'm going to settle down or have one of my own. But none have been as consistently pointed or judgmental as those from my older sister, Valerie. Valerie is 2 years older than me and lives in one of those HOA-ruled subdivisions just outside of Atlanta. Big driveway, big house, bigger opinions. She has 3 kids and a husband named Richard who, in fairness, is more of a living, breathing coat rack than an actual partner. She's always been someone who clings to structure: PTA, church groups, soccer leagues, and the endless pursuit of online approval. For years, Valerie has wielded motherhood like a weapon. It's her badge of superiority. She'd make jokes about how rested I must be without kids, how empty my holidays must feel, and how I'll never understand unconditional love. I let it roll off my back, mostly. I wasn't competing with her. But she always seemed to be competing with me, or rather, with the freedom I represented. Tensions had been brewing for years, but it all came to a boil last summer at our mom's lake house in Lake Lure. A casual family barbecue, hot dogs, paper plates, a cooler of beer turned into the kind of moment where the air thickens, the world slows, and every eye lands on you. Because that was the day I brought Sonia. Sonia was 13 then. She came into my life through my work, through a system that had failed her more than once. Foster care, bouncing between placements, schools, even cities. But she was brilliant, observant, funny, stubborn, and fragile in the ways you'd expect from a girl who had to grow up too fast. After a year of fostering her, we'd finally made it official. Just days before the barbecue, I'd finalized the adoption. I hadn't told anyone in the family yet, not because I was hiding it, but because I knew what kind of reaction I might get. I didn't want my daughter's first introduction to my family to be stained with passive-aggressive comparisons or loaded glances. But I brought her anyway. She wanted to come. And I wanted her to be included. We arrived late afternoon, just as Valerie was showing off a new phone app she made her youngest use to track chores. Her kids were half listening, noses on screens, while Richard stood by the grill like a statue. Valerie saw us walking up the stone path. She did that thing where her eyes scan someone from head to toe politely on the surface, but the intent is always judgmental. "Oh," she said, plastering on a smile. "Who's this?" "This is Sonia," I said calmly. "She's with me." Sonia stood close, gripping the small backpack she insisted on bringing, though we were only staying for a few hours. Valerie blinked. "From work?" I paused. "She's my daughter." Valerie's smile froze. "Oh. I didn't know you'd adopted." She said it like I'd bought a used car off Craigslist. Then turned to Mom, already dishing out deviled eggs, and said, "Isn't that just so, Deirdre?" It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Dinner went on. People ate. The kids ran around. The adults had wine. Sonia remained glued to my side, polite, quiet. I could feel the eyes on her, on me. At one point, Valerie leaned over, voice low enough to feel conspiratorial. "It's sweet what you're doing. But it's not the same, you know. Raising your own, giving birth, that's a different level of love. You wouldn't understand." That was it. Years of biting my tongue, of letting her pick and prod at my choices, they all condensed into one moment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Funny you say that," I said, sipping from my lemonade. "Because I just finalized the adoption this week. Sonia is my daughter. And I've never felt more sure of what love is." The patio went quiet. All the ambient chatter, the laughter, the background music from Dad's Bluetooth speaker, it all faded. I didn't plan to make a scene. But that silence? That was the sound of a narrative cracking. Even Mom looked stunned, her fork midair. Richard blinked as if the conversation had passed over him like a drone. Valerie's jaw clenched. Sonia looked up at me, a mix of confusion and pride. She wasn't used to being defended. That look on her face was worth every awkward stare in the world. Dad broke the silence with a soft, "Congratulations, Dee." The moment passed, but the silence lingered like humidity before a storm. I could feel the unease moving through the crowd like static. People weren't sure if they should go back to their food or acknowledge what just happened. Valerie didn't respond. She just sipped her wine like it tasted bitter now. Sonia fidgeted beside me, and I gave her a reassuring nudge. She had no way of knowing just how heavy that moment had been. It wasn't just about her, it was about me finally standing my ground, in front of the one person who had spent most of our lives convincing everyone that she was the only one who did things right. I stayed seated, calm, pretending not to notice the awkward glances flying across the patio. Valerie's kids had returned to their endless games of tag and squabbling over iPads. Richard was now deeply interested in the grill, flipping burgers that didn't need flipping. Mom hovered nearby, clearly uncomfortable, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel she didn't need. She avoided my eyes, which told me she was trying to process the scene without taking sides. But my dad stayed seated next to me, quiet and present. That was his way. He never interfered, but when he approved of something, he didn't need words. About 20 minutes passed before Valerie made her move. She stood up a little too abruptly and clinked her glass with a fork. "I just want to say how grateful I am that we can all be here together," she started, her voice tight. "Family means everything, especially in a world where so many people substitute it with other things." It wasn't subtle. And it wasn't accidental. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't need to. I just looked at her calm, unmoved, and let her talk herself into her own awkward grave. She went on about how challenging motherhood is and how not everyone is cut out for it, and then she ended the speech with a tight-lipped smile in my direction. No one clapped. Not even Mom. After that, the evening became fractured. People were polite, but the warmth had cooled. I could feel conversations tiptoeing around me, glancing toward Sonia like she was fragile or volatile or a symbol they didn't quite understand. It's funny how quickly people revert to politeness when discomfort hits. That night, I saw clearly how many people were afraid of Valerie. Afraid to cross her. Or maybe they just didn't want to deal with the fallout. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Later, when most of the kids had gone inside and people were making sleepy goodbyes, Valerie found me by the dock. "You really had to say it like that?" she asked, arms crossed, her voice lower now, almost trembling with irritation. "In front of everyone? You're upset because I didn't let you make me small." "Not this time." Her mouth twisted. "You just always think you're so above everything." "No," I said. "I just finally stopped letting you talk down to me." "That's not the same thing." She stared at me for a moment, the wind blowing a few wisps of hair into her face, and for the first time in years, I think she didn't know what to say. "It's not real, you know," she added, softer this time, like she was trying to convince herself. "It's not the same. Raising someone else's child. You didn't give birth to her." I didn't respond right away. I wanted to say something that would hit her, not to hurt, but to make her think. "You're right. I didn't give birth to her," I said finally. "But every day I choose her. Every day she chooses me. And that's love too, Valerie. Whether you believe it or not." That was it. She didn't reply. She turned and walked away, her shoes crunching along the gravel path. That night, Sonia and I stayed at a nearby Airbnb. It was a converted old mill cottage just 10 minutes from the lake, tucked away in the woods. It had a wraparound porch and creaky floorboards and more peace than I'd felt in years. As I tucked her in, she looked at me with a seriousness that belied her age. You don't have to bring me to things like this if you don't want to, she said. I know I make it complicated. You don't make anything complicated, I told her. You make it worth it. She nodded, then turned away like she didn't want me to see how much that meant. And in that quiet little room, surrounded by antique lamps and the soft rustle of summer leaves outside, I felt something click into place. I had spent years being compared to a version of life that never fit me. Now, I had a version that did. And no one, not even my sister, could take that from me. The days after the barbecue were quiet. Too quiet, actually. I didn't hear from my mom, which was unusual. Normally she'd send a text after a family event, something benign like "so nice to see everyone, hope you made it home safe." But this time, nothing. I figured she was processing. That was her style. She let things marinate, then tried to find the most non-confrontational way to say what she really thought. What I wasn't expecting, though, was the email. It came on a Tuesday. Subject line: some thoughts. Some thoughts. That's how she always opened difficult conversations. It was her version of "brace yourself." Deirdre, I wanted to say that I think it's wonderful what you've done for Sonia. Truly. But I hope you understand that Valerie feels a bit blindsided. She said she didn't know you were fostering, let alone adopting. Maybe she's hurt you didn't share that journey with her. I'm not saying she was right in how she spoke to you, she wasn't. But I also hope this doesn't become a rift between you. Your sisters. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Because while I appreciated the attempt at diplomacy, it felt like a soft reprimand wrapped in a hug. Valerie wasn't upset because I didn't include her in my adoption journey. She was upset because I had something she couldn't frame as inferior anymore. Sonia wasn't a hobby. She wasn't a project. She was my family. I eventually wrote back, Mom, I understand Valerie has feelings. I do too. She's made comments about my life for years, belittling, condescending ones, and I've stayed quiet to keep the peace. But I'm not apologizing for standing up for myself or for my daughter. I hope you can understand that. Love, Deirdre. A few days later, Dad called. Not to talk about Valerie. Just to ask if Sonia liked old radio shows, because he had a collection of CDs he thought she might enjoy. I could hear the carefulness in his voice, like he was trying to bridge something without pushing too hard. We talked for nearly an hour. About music, books, his new tomatoes that weren't growing like they used to. He mentioned nothing about the barbecue, but before we hung up, he said, You know, Dee, sometimes people who think they have all the answers get real uncomfortable when someone else finds their own. That was the closest thing to an "I am proud of you" I'd ever heard from him. And it meant more than I could explain. A few weeks went by. Sonia had started 8th grade. We'd worked out a morning routine, and while the transition wasn't seamless, we were finding our rhythm. She was opening up more, asking questions about how I got into nonprofit work, whether I ever had a dog growing up, what I liked to cook. They were the kinds of questions that made it clear she was carving out a map of who I was so she could understand who we were. Then one afternoon, I got a text from Valerie. Valerie, can we talk? I waited a few hours before replying. Not to play games, but to be sure I actually wanted to hear her out. Eventually I responded, if this is going to be a conversation where you try to tell me what motherhood is again, I'm not interested. She replied almost immediately. Valerie, no. I want to apologize. That was new. So we met for coffee. Neutral ground. A place neither of us had claimed as ours. We sat at a small table outside a cafe in downtown Greenville, halfway between our two homes. She arrived looking nervous. Less polished than usual. No styled waves or bold lipstick. Just jeans and a cardigan, hair in a low ponytail. She looked like someone who had spent the morning trying to figure out what version of herself to bring. She didn't waste time. I was wrong, she said, before we'd even ordered. What I said at the barbecue was cruel. And jealous. And I've been sitting with that for weeks now. I let her talk. I think I always resented how free you were. You made your own choices, and people respected that. And I followed the script. And sometimes it feels like I don't even know who I am beyond being a mom. So when you did something big, something beautiful, I felt like it made my whole identity smaller. Which isn't fair. It's not your fault. She exhaled, then said, I'm sorry, Dee. For all of it. And you know what? I believed her. Not because I needed her apology. But because she finally said something real. Something that wasn't coded in competition or self-justification. I nodded. Thank you for saying that. It means something. She nodded too, slowly. Is she happy? Sonia? She's figuring it out, I said. But yeah. I think she's getting there. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But we sipped our coffee, and for the first time in years, we just sat there as sisters, not opponents. And while I wouldn't say everything was magically repaired, that moment was a beginning. The weeks that followed my coffee with Valerie were oddly calm. It's strange how the absence of friction can feel louder than conflict when you've lived in tension for so long. For years, every family event, every phone call, every social media post carried subtext comparisons, subtle jabs, little dogs that added up like paper cuts. And suddenly, none of that was there. Valerie didn't send her usual curated snapshots to our group text. There were no unsolicited parenting tips, must-reads on child development, or gentle reminders about what love really means. It was quiet. Almost suspiciously so. But I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I didn't have the energy for that anymore. Instead, I focused on Sonia. Fall in Asheville is a slow, golden sort of magic. Crisp mornings, warm afternoons, trees that look like they were painted one leaf at a time. Sonia and I spent our weekends hiking trails off the Blue Ridge Parkway, visiting farmers markets, making clumsy attempts at apple pies in our tiny kitchen. We had inside jokes now. Favorite shows. A grocery list only we understood. Her laughter came easier, less guarded. And her eyes? She started meeting mine without flinching. I saw the shift. She was softening, not because life had stopped being hard, but because she no longer had to carry the weight of it alone. One evening in late October, as we carved pumpkins on the front porch, she asked, "Do you think people change?" It caught me off guard. "Sure," I said, wiping pumpkin guts off my arm. "Not always easily. And not always in the way we hope. But yeah, I think people can change." She didn't respond right away. Just kept carving a careful, focused design that turned out to be a fox. "I think I have," she said quietly. That moment stayed with me. Because she wasn't just talking about herself. She was offering something back, proof of our bond, proof that the gamble I took when I opened my home and heart to her wasn't a mistake. And somehow, that gave me the strength to face what came next. Thanksgiving crept up faster than expected. Mom wanted to host again, but this time she made a point to call me directly. "I'd love it if you and Sonia came," she said over the phone. "And don't feel like you have to bring anything fancy, just yourselves." That alone was different. In the past, I was always subtly nudged to bring appetizers or that kale thing you make or something else that gave them a way to keep me categorized, the single, health-conscious one. This was the first time it felt like we were just invited. We went. Sonia was nervous, but she had changed not just in how she acted, but in how she carried herself. She wore a navy sweater she'd picked out herself, hair pulled back in a half ponytail. She brought a small sketchbook with her, just in case things got awkward. When we walked in, Valerie's kids were already there, arguing over who got the last crescent roll. Richard was helping Mom with wine glasses. "Valerie?" She looked, humbled. Still polished, but quieter than usual. To her credit, she came up to Sonia first. "Hey," she said, offering a small, warm smile. "Nice to see you again." Sonia glanced at me, then nodded. "You too." And that was it. Simple. Respectful. No dramatics. No fake enthusiasm. Just real, cautious human decency. It meant more than anything Valerie could have said in a monologue. Dinner went on without drama. My dad told old stories, Valerie's kids were loud and sticky-fingered, and Sonia sat next to me, eating slowly, thoughtfully. Every now and then, she'd lean in and whisper something only I could hear. We had our own world now, and that table for once didn't feel like enemy territory. Then came the toast. Traditionally, Valerie always offered the Thanksgiving toast. Something scripted, sentimental, usually about motherhood or God's grace or the joy of gathering. But this time, Dad stood up instead. I want to say something, he said, raising his glass. This year's been different. And I mean that in the best way. Sometimes, when we make space for people to live the life that fits them, not the one we expect beautiful things to happen. He looked at me. At Sonia. To the chosen family, he added. And to people who show up not because they have to, but because they want to. Everyone raised their glass. Valerie included. And that moment, quiet, real, warm, was what I had needed all along. Not a loud validation. Not an apology shouted across the table. Just recognition. After dessert, while the kids played and the grown-ups lingered in the kitchen with coffee and pie crumbs, Valerie approached me again. Not with a smirk. Not with a smile. Just something genuine in her face I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. I saw that PBS thing, she said, her tone soft. You and Sonia, it was beautiful. I hadn't known she'd watched it. Thanks, I said, cautiously. She's lucky to have you, she added. I didn't say, no, I'm lucky to have her. I just nodded, and for once, she let the silence be a full stop instead of a competition. The weeks after Thanksgiving felt like breathing again. No tightness in my chest when I checked my phone. No overanalyzing texts from Valerie. No second-guessing whether Sonia felt like she belonged. We were just living. Sonia started sleeping with her door cracked open. That may not seem like much, but to me, it meant everything. For the first 6 months she lived with me, that door stayed locked like a vault. It was her safe zone. Her boundary. I respected it and never pushed it. But I also knew it meant she hadn't quite trusted her safety yet. Not really. Now, she'd leave it ajar, letting the warm hallway light spill into her room. Sometimes I'd hear her softly humming. Or turning pages of a book late at night. The kind of things a kid does when they know no one's coming to yank the rug out from under them. One evening in December, as we were driving home from a local bookstore, our little ritual asked if she could bring a friend over during winter break. Just a girl from art class. Someone who likes wolves and fantasy books and spoken run-on sentences. Of course, I said. Want to bake something for when she comes? Sonia shrugged but smiled a little. Maybe gingerbread? It was such an ordinary conversation. So regular. But it felt like magic. Because when you raise a child who's never been given permanence, these everyday things, cookie recipes, casual friends, inside jokes feel like miracles. They're signs that a life is growing where trauma used to live. We ended up decorating gingerbread wolves with icing fur and candy eyes. They looked bizarre but perfect. And as we worked side by side in the kitchen, she said, "This is the longest I've lived anywhere since I was 9. I didn't speak right away. I was afraid if I did, I'd cry. But I rested my hand on her back and said, "You can stay as long as you want." Around Christmas, Mom called me. Not to ask for anything. Just to chat. She wanted updates on Sonia. On me. She asked for my gingerbread recipe which, frankly, was just one I found online. We spoke for nearly 30 minutes without a single mention of Valerie, or anything passive-aggressive, or any weird tension. I think about you girls a lot, she said near the end. I wish I'd spoken up sooner. I should have protected you more when you were younger. That part hit deep. Because Mom wasn't one to admit fault. She was a peacemaker, yes, but rarely a truth teller. I know you were trying your best, I told her. And I meant it. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't need perfect anymore. Valerie and I didn't become best friends. There were no long heart-to-hearts or sudden shared hobbies. But we stopped treating each other like mirrors we were trying to avoid. She sent Sonia a small sketchbook for Christmas unwrapped, just placed in a padded envelope with a note, for when your ideas get too big to hold inside. Aunt Valerie Sonia didn't say much when she opened it. Just looked at the cover for a long time and ran her fingers along the pages. She started drawing that night. Quietly. By herself. And that's how I knew she didn't just feel safe anymore. She felt seen. By January, Sonia had joined the school's art club. Not because I pushed her, I never would, but because she came home one day and said, I think I want to show my stuff. She started talking about the spring art show. About wanting to frame one of her fox drawings. She was finally doing what every kid deserves to do, looking forward to something. One afternoon, she asked, do you think people at the show will know I'm adopted? I looked at her for a moment, trying to read what she really wanted to hear. I think they'll know you're talented, I said. And kind. And brave. And if you want them to know the rest, that's up to you. She nodded. Okay. And that was enough. A few months later, spring finally arrived in Asheville. Soft rains. Blooming trees. The kind of mornings that smell like fresh earth and renewal. The art show was held in the school gymnasium. Folding tables, handmade name cards, student art tacked onto wire grids and poster boards. Parents hovered awkwardly, clutching coffee cups and phone cameras. Sonia stood by her display 3 framed sketches, including the fox, the wolf, and one of a woman holding a house in her hands. It stopped me in my tracks. She didn't say it was me. She didn't have to. Valerie came, too. Unexpectedly. She showed up near the end, quietly, no grand entrance. Just offered Sonia a nod and said, that one's my favorite, pointing at the fox. Sonia grinned. Thanks. Valerie looked at me then, not with pity, not with superiority, but something like respect. Maybe even a little awe. She didn't try to say more. She just let the moment speak for itself. And that was it. No dramatic reconciliations. No teary finales. Just small moments stacked on top of each other like bricks in a new foundation. The truth is, I didn't win anything. There was no scoreboard. No vindication ceremony. But I did something far better. I built a life. One that doesn't need to be compared. One that doesn't apologize for existing outside someone else's blueprint. One that Sonia and I chose and continue to choose every single day. And as for Valerie? I think she's still figuring herself out. Maybe that's her version of growth. I don't need her to understand everything. I just need her not to get in the way. And she hasn't. That's more than enough.